In this video, we're going to look at one of the more complex no-code workflows I've created, and I'll share with you some of the rakes that I stepped on along the way so that you can avoid making those same mistakes. Let's dive in. Hi, I'm Kyle, the creator of No Code Collab, a site with tips, tricks, and tutorials for your next no-code project. If you haven't already, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and be sure to check out our website where we have code snippets and other resources to help you during your no-code builds. The workflow that we're going to look at is actually something that I built a few years ago. So the no-code space has changed quite a bit, but the rakes that I stepped on and the things that I learned are still applicable as you are building your no-code workflows today. The app is basically an application and quoting tool. So someone comes to a website, fills out a form, and then we generate a proposal and do some logic to generate a quote and documents. And then we notify a bunch of people, store the documents in different places. And so we automate that whole process and save a bunch of time. So let's look at it now so that you can see what we did originally. And then we'll take a peek at how we updated it using what we learned to make the whole thing run a lot smoother. Okay, I'm going to give you a quick rundown of the workflow so that you understand all the tools that we're using and how they all integrate together. So we started with a Mailchimp mailing list. This is an application that people need to fill out every year. So we wanted to keep an updated list of everyone that has applied. So we started by creating this list, sending it out to people. When they get an email, they can click on a link and end up on a SquareSpace website where they can learn more. I used SquareSpace because I hadn't started using Webflow yet. If I were to do this today, I would probably rebuild the website in Webflow. Once people are on the Squarespace site, they can click a link to apply, which took them to a Typeform where they filled out a bunch of answers on the form. After submitting the Typeform, then we integrated with Zapier, and Zapier then sent all of that data to Google Sheets. And the reason we sent it to Google Sheets was because we needed to use a bunch of logic based on their responses to calculate a quote. It wasn't as easy as just simple arithmetic. We needed to build out some logic that we needed to have in a spreadsheet. So we took all of the responses from Typeform and put it in a Google Sheet. We also used Zapier to send any new applicants to Mailchimp if they weren't already in our mailing list so that we could market to them next year. Once we were in Google Sheets, we made this calculation, we crunched these numbers, and then there was a field that was generated, a quote, a price effectively. Once that price field was updated, so a row got added, then the price field was updated, and then we went back to Zapier. And Zapier then took all that information and sent it to Webmerge. Now, Webmerge is now what we call Formstack Documents, but prior to being Formstack Documents, it was Webmerge. So Zapier took all that data and sent it to Webmerge. And then what Webmerge did was it generated 2 PDFs and a Microsoft Excel file. So we created an application, a quote, and then an Excel file just to validate our numbers. Once we had created all of those documents, the quote with the price was actually sent to Sign Now so that the applicant could then sign that and approve it. And then all 3 of the documents were sent to Google Drive. Additionally, we sent all 3 of those documents via Gmail to our team so that they could see that we have a new applicant, and here are the documents that were generated. Once the document was sent to Sign Now, then the applicant would sign the document. Sign Now would then save that into Google Drive and notify us that there's a new signed application. So soup to nuts, we've got a workflow, but all of this is automated. There are tools now that can do a lot of this under one roof. At the time, there wasn't really anything that ticked all the boxes, so we had to piece this all together. If you count them up, there are 9 tools that we are using. Mailchimp, SquareSpace, Typeform, Zapier, Google Sheets, Webmerge, SignNow, Google Drive, and Gmail. Okay, so we've looked at our workflow from a 5,000-foot view. I want to share a few of the things that I learned so that you can hopefully avoid some of the same mistakes. Point number 1 is that every tool is a potential point of failure. If you change your credentials, if they update their API, if a tool gets a new version that's quite a bit different than the one that you were using, if Zapier updates, these are all reasons that your workflow could just stop working. So the fewer tools that you have, the fewer points of failure that you are going to have in your workflow. That's point number 1. Try to keep your tools down because every tool is a potential point of failure. Tip number 2 is to start small and don't over-engineer your solution at the beginning. A good example of this in our workflow was that we built all this logic and all these things in not only to the form, but to the document part of it so that we could get signatures right away. Well, what ended up happening was people actually had a lot of questions and they didn't really sign the documents right away. They wanted to talk to someone. They wanted to get a few more things answered before they signed. And so us sending them a document for signature kind of was a little bit jarring for them. They weren't ready. And so that whole process became unnecessary because people didn't do it in the first place. So we didn't really need that. We don't really need that anymore. So don't over-engineer or think that you know what the final solution should be when you haven't started yet. Start small and build piece by piece. Tip number 3 is rather specific, but it was important to us, and that is don't use Typeform for really long forms. We have an application that has probably 50 or more questions. And when you're doing one question at a time, 50 times, it gets really cumbersome and kind of annoying. So when it comes to Typeform, I usually stick to forms that are 20-ish or 25 questions tops. Anything under that, it's fantastic. It's probably one of the best tools out there for short forms. Long forms, I've moved away from Typeform because of how repetitive it gets. And the last tip is to use tools that you know. If every new workflow requires you to go learn a new tool, you'll spend all your time learning new tools. Your tech stack is going to be way too big. So find some tools that you really like, dig into those, and use those to their full potential instead of finding a new tool for every little step of the process. And if that means you have to modify your workflow a little bit, understand that that might actually be a good trade-off. It might force you to rethink how you do things and force you to streamline in ways that you otherwise wouldn't have thought of. So use tools that you know. If there is something that you absolutely need and you're not getting it with your current tech stack, then that's when you'd maybe want to go look for a new tool that you could learn, because then it will be worth it. So after a few years of using that workflow, as I showed you, I got tired of all the points of failure and Zapier not working and APIs changing. So I rebuilt it. And I want to show you how I streamlined it and how I rebuilt it, because I think it'll drive home a lot of the points that I just shared with you. Okay, so here we are in the updated workflow. We've still got our mailing list, so we kept Mailchimp for that. Once someone gets an email and they click on the link, they end up in SquareSpace. The site was good. The content was there. I didn't feel that I needed to update it to Webflow. So we still have our SquareSpace site. Once someone clicks on the application button in SquareSpace, instead of going to Typeform, I introduced Formstack Forms. This allows us to have multiple pages. It allows us to have multiple questions on a page. It just feels a little less significant than answering 50 questions. Additionally, the great thing about Formstack Forms is we're able to hijack the submit action. So before all of the data is submitted, we can run a little function. We embed code, we run a little function. I wrote a little JavaScript thing, and I've calculated our quote right inside of Formstack Forms. So now we don't need to send everything to Google Sheets. We don't need to connect Formstack Forms with Zapier, with Google Sheets to then run the thing. We're doing it all right inside of Formstack Forms. If you're curious about how to do this, we have a video on creating custom calculations in Formstack Forms. So someone fills out the form, they hit submit. Before the data is sent anywhere, we run and we generate our quote. And so now we've created and we've generated our quote with all the logic and everything. Formstack has an integration with Mailchimp, and so we're able to see if the person who submitted it is on our marketing list, so we don't need Zapier for that either. Then Formstack Forms, because of the tight integration with Formstack Documents, we can go straight from Formstack Forms to Formstack Documents. This used to be called Webmerge. Formstack acquired Webmerge, so this is effectively the same tool. And that is where we have our 3 documents that are generated. Everything in the dark gray here, this is all under one roof. This is all Formstack. So we don't need Zapier to be exchanging data here. This all lives together and it's tightly integrated and it's great. Then, as I mentioned that we don't really need the signature because people weren't doing it that way. They weren't signing their documents that way. They had a bunch of questions. And by the time they were actually ready to sign the document, they had the PDF already, and they were actually just signing the PDF and voluntarily sending it in. So that whole signature process was obsolete for us. So we didn't really need that because everyone was doing it a different way anyway. So we've cut out the whole signature process. And now after all 3 of these documents are generated, we save them to Google Drive and we send an email to ourselves saying there's a new application, here's all the documents. And we actually have created some email templates knowing that we're going to get questions. We've created some templates with the applicant information all right in there that we can just look at quickly and then forward on to them to kind of keep that process moving. So we've modified our workflow and how we work to better fit how people are expecting us to work. So that is the whole workflow. Totally streamlined. The bulk of it all happens inside of Formstack, the calculations, the document generation. It all happens right there in a tool that I'm very familiar with. So it rarely, if ever, fails. This integration is so tight that the very few points of failure. If you look at the tools that we have, we've got 6 tools: Mailchimp, SquareSpace, Formstack Forms, Formstack Docs, Google Drive, and Gmail. Down from 9. And Formstack Forms and Docs are so tightly integrated that it feels like they're kind of one tool because of how nice they work together. So they're very much different tools, but it's such a good experience that the majority of what we're doing is right here in number 3 and 4. So that's how we updated the workflow. It's much more streamlined and it makes our lives a lot easier because things aren't actually breaking so much. Hopefully that tutorial has helped you identify a few of the rakes that are out there so that you can avoid stepping on them during your no-code builds. If you have any questions or feedback, please leave them in the comments. Subscribe to our channel, like this video, and we will see you at the next tutorial.